return from 6 weeks in France, where he is on sabbatical from his ministry until Tuesday. So let me tell you a little bit about him. He is the spiritual director of the Simi Valley Center for Spiritual Living. I've known him for a long, long time. He served on the board of directors of international centers and also Religious Science International, right when we did the transformation. And guess who was involved with doing that transformation? He and his wife, who was at the time also on our board of directors, led the whole thing, the whole transformation. Who was instrumental, and you've heard me say that I was privileged to go to the meetings about branding. Who did I go with? With him. So that the whole thing of integration, and some of you don't even know what I'm talking about. Thank God. Because there's only one. But in the distant past, there were two organizations. And in the far distant past, this man wrote a letter to the leader of the other organization, copying the leader of our organization, said, no, we really should look at how could we come together as one? Which started a whole flurry of activity, you could imagine, and all sorts of things, because people, in his workshop yesterday, he explained that there are people whose job it is to guard whatever is and keep it the way it's always been. And so some of those people were doing that. And others were going, yes, what a great idea. He is the author of this book, Sacred Thinking, which you will be able to purchase after the service. He has some for sale. He has written another, he's in process of writing another book that was part of his sabbatical. It is just my joy to welcome my very good friend speaking on the nature of God, defining God. Please welcome the Reverend Dr. Jim Lockard.
Thank you. I like it here. Really, it's nice. Wade, thank you for that beautiful song. Reminded me we were in a cafe in Paris one night while I was on sabbatical working on my book, but you got to get out once in a while. And this cute little waitress was waiting on us, and she spoke really good English, and she was planning to move to New York to go to acting school. And she made a comment to us, and Dr. Ken Gordon, the spiritual leader of our organization, and his wife were with Dorianne and I. And she goes, "Oh, you all have the cutest American accents." And Wade, you have an American accent with French, but that's okay. It's, in case you didn't know that. I'm now able to detect that. So before I begin, I do want to say, I want to congratulate this community on the consciousness that you have always demonstrated in our movement. This building being kind of a part of the evidence of that. But I remember when I first came into the teaching back in the late 80s, I would hear about San Juan Capistrano as one of the flagship churches in our movement. We called them churches then. We're kind of getting away from that. But I know that it continues, and under Dr. Heather, her amazing leadership. She is one of the bright lights in our movement. Yes. And it takes one to know one, so... and I see that you all know that. So affirm with me, I am a bright light, in my world. Yes, you are. And I have to get a plug in for my wife, Dorianne. Dorianne, she and I met when we were both elected to the board of directors of then Religious Science International, so it was your typical board of directors romance. I'm sure you've all had one. And anyway, but we found each other then. We'd been kind of eyeing each other at Asilomar for a couple years, but we'd never really spoken. And we, about a couple years later, got married at Asilomar. And she is now the president of the board of directors of the Science of Mind Archives. Library and Archives, which is in Golden, Colorado. So be sure to chat with her afterward about the archives. There's all kinds of stuff there that you can access. Dr. Holmes' talks, ebooks you can download. And if you'd like to make a donation to the archives, of course, that would be welcome as well. It's really a wonderful resource that we have out at our headquarters in Golden. Okay, so let's see. Let's talk about what I came here to talk about. Oh, you know what? It's not on. Please stand by. Okay. There it is. When I first came into this teaching, it was 1989. It was Memorial Day weekend, so pretty close to this date. And I went into the center in Fort Lauderdale, which was called at the time the Science of Mind Center, and it was this beautiful building that nobody in town knew what it was. Just some weird group met in there is what we knew about. And I went in and ostensibly to check out the bookstore, but I stayed for the service, and I stayed for the second service, and I kept coming back. But one of the things that initial exposure to the teaching sort of jarred me was the idea of how we look at the nature of spirit or God, how we need to define it, and I never realized that you already do. You know, if you had 500 Catholics in a room, or 500 Buddhists in a room, or 500 Methodists in a room, or 500 religious scientists in a room, you would have in each one of those rooms 500 different definitions of what God is. Even though they may have all been exposed to the same general teaching and so forth, we each take it and make it our own. And we have this idea in our mind that's an evolving idea. And if you understand the psychological concept of projection, it's basically how we experience life. We project our own consciousness onto the world faithfully mirrors it back, and we blame the world because it doesn't look right. That's kind of what's going on most of the time. And we do the same thing with the nature of God, with our understanding of God. And I would describe God as all that there is. You know, there's a cute little saying, there is no spot where God is not. But really, that's true. There is nothing in your experience, in your world, in yourself that could ever exist that wasn't an aspect of, a part of what God is. God's the whole thing. That which we can see and that which we cannot see. Now, I was raised in the Catholic tradition. I went to 12 years of Catholic school. And then, like most of you, I went into law enforcement for 25 years. As my original teacher, Dr. Bill Tolliver, used to say, I'm amazed you're not a Nazi. Well, we took care of him. But anyway, so, there was a kind of a doctrinaire approach to how you looked at spirituality. And in religion class every day we would learn, that God was up in the sky somewhere and had a physical being and sort of ran things from a big office up there. And he sort of looked like this guy. It was a male, right? Gray hair, probably a beard, a white jacket with a big gold G on the pocket. And he had a computer there with a smite button. And he could bring you up on heavenly Facebook and hit smite. And crap would rain down upon you in your life. And he would do this whether you deserved or not because he loved you unconditionally. Now, when you're 6 or 7, you're a little impressionable. So you would hear this, and then I would raise my hand and I'd say, but sister, and I would ask a question like, what about all those babies that get killed in the Bible? If God loves us, why did he let the babies get killed? And then I would get sent up to the rectory to speak to the priest. And the priest would tell me, don't ask so many questions. So I had 12 years of that. So I came out of that experience the day I graduated from Catholic high school, I left the church. And I became a knife and fork Christian. I went to church suppers and church breakfasts. If I was in a church, I was eaten for about 15 years because it was cheap and you could, a lot of my friends would go and we'd get in the car and go to a church supper in the Eastern Shore of Maryland where I was working at the time and have crab cakes and ham and you'd leave $1 in the basket and leave. It was fantastic. So long story short, I found myself in this teaching and what I began to hear about was a different idea of the nature of God. A God that was bigger than the idea that I had grown up with. A God that wasn't personally after me. So let's... There we go. Ernest Holmes, this is a fairly long quote, but he does tend to do that. The world is saturated with divinity, immersed in reality, and filled with possibility. We must take this divine possibility and mold it into present actuality and everyday experience. This is the way to freedom, the pathway to peace and happiness. So if we think of God or Spirit, and by the way, don't get hung up on the word. I mean, I've had people come and say, I really have this aversion to the word God because, it was kind of beaten into me as a kid. And so, really any word will do. If God is infinite, call him Bruce. It doesn't matter. Or Mary or whatever. Cosmic muffin. Something. Biblical scholars tell us in the Old Testament there are 14 versions of God. In Genesis, there's about 5. The first book of Genesis where, it moves upon the waters and says, let there be light. That's Elohim. Elohim is a plural term. That first biblical story, the first biblical creation story comes from a polytheistic worldview. That the gods created everything that exists. And everything in that story is good. God's, let there be light, saw that it was good. Created the firmament, saw that it was good. It's the second story, which appears actually to be a little older in origin, which is Adam and Eve, and that's the rib and all that stuff. The snake and, by the way, the snake was the only one telling the truth in that story. Pay attention. That story was that's the God there is Yahweh. And Yahweh is kind of like your drunken uncle. I mean, he's very unpredictable. You don't know what kind of mood he's going to be in. You've got to walk on eggshells around him. He might just cuddle you and hold you and nurture you, or he might kick you out of the garden, because he's mad. And he can't find you. What kind of God can't find you, right? Adam and Eve hide because they're naked, and God can't find them. I want a different God. And the snake says, God tells him, if you eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you'll die. And the snake says, no, you won't, God. And they eat the fruit, and guess what? They don't die. The snake was right. So this whole story is like a bad soap opera. And it forms the identity of the major religions of the West. We are religions of exile. We were kicked out of the garden because we did something we shouldn't have done that was shameful. And now we've got to earn our way back in to a God who he loves us so much, he sends his only son here to die. And even after that, we can still go to hell. How do you win in a setup like that? Now, I'm being a little irreverent. Well, maybe a lot, but we just don't think about it. When I was a little kid, I'm hearing these stories. Oh yeah, that must be the way it is, and if it doesn't make sense, that's my fault. There must be something wrong with me if I'm not getting this, and if my life isn't working out, because I don't have any control over my life. God's got the smite button, and God's got the success button, and whatever one he presses that day, that's what I get. I don't have any responsibility other than to suffer. Because God seems to like it when you suffer. Not in this life, you get rewarded later. No wonder we're so screwed up as a culture. Think about the shadow that builds up when you think about that lack of powerlessness, and the power that you're supposed to worship is so unpredictable. So when Ernest Holmes knew, and he wasn't the only one that knew this, but he knew this within our structure, was you gotta get a better definition going. You gotta get one that's closer to the truth. Now there's a couple of things we're gonna talk about. Let's see, I forget what I put in these slides. I did them so long ago. Can you do it from the back? Oh. Kabir, by the way, is one of the ecstatic Sufi poets, and he was from India, whereas Rumi was in Persia, about the same time. Kabir says, "Behold but one in all things, it is the second that leads you astray." Now, when you get over to the East, when you get into India and places like that, and you talk about oneness, they're like, "Yeah, we get it." You know, they believe everything is one. They're taught that. It's part of their creation story. Over here, the separation occurred when Eve convinced Adam. See, Eve eating the apple wasn't good enough. Adam had to eat it, right? Because only what the man does really counts, right? So Yahweh is misogynistic too, and gets kicked out of the garden, and then that's separation. Well, what if that wasn't a fall? What if that was the choice of spirit to come into form? What if that's what the essential creation story was? That spirit, undifferentiated spirit, decided to have a different experience of duality, and that was the direction coming in, where in order to be dual, the unified force has to experience difficulty and joy, because that's the nature of a dualistic world. What if that was the story? It wasn't a fall at all. It was like spirit saying, well, let's try this. Let me have an experience of duality, which means it looks like I'm here and you're there, but really at root, we're all in the same place. And let's play with that for a few millennia and see what happens. See? And we've misunderstood the whole concept. I call Christianity and Islam and Judaism the great misunderstanding. Because it is still about oneness. One of our colleagues, Dr. Charles Geddes, has this statement. He says, you showed up on this planet without an instruction manual, and you were misinformed. And there have been spiritual leaders throughout the millennia who have tried to inform us properly, Ernest Holmes being one of them, and congratulate yourself because you're discerning enough to be here. Because you at some level recognize the other stuff doesn't quite make sense. It's not about good intentions. It's about starting from a premise that's based on truth. I can't start from a false premise and get to the right answer. And we have so much strife in the world because of that. You know, people, why can't we just love one another? Look at the creation story. It says you're supposed to be confused and suffer, and only a few of you will ever get into heaven. And it's pretty much played out that way. So Kabir says it's the second thing that leads you astray. Next slide, please. Next one. So let's define God a little bit. Okay, and let's just do this. And I know, for some of you, you may think, when I first heard this, I'm like, that's blasphemy. But just set that aside for a minute. First, you can't help but do it, even if you're in a teaching that says you can't do it. When I was in Catholic school learning about the nature of God, I was creating my own definition of God. I wasn't doing it consciously, but I was kind of deciding whatever was told to me, whatever I read, what it meant, and that became my truth. You have three basic relationships in your life. You have your relationship to spirit, which is the creative intelligence within you. You have your relationship to yourself, which is formed and based upon that first relationship with the spirit or the nature of reality. And then you have your relationships with the world, with the people around you that are formed and based upon your relationship with yourself. You can't love anyone else any more than you love yourself, because it's all projection. So if my relationship with my understanding of spirit, and let's call spirit the nature of reality, is skewed or based on false information, my relationship with myself will probably suffer. I won't realize my own self-worth. I'll think not only do I not like myself, I'm not supposed to. And then I project that onto others, and I wonder why I don't like the people in my life. If they'd only change, everything would be okay. But don't worry, God will smite them too. I hope. But you can't help but make a definition of God. And your definition is unique to you. It may be very much like someone else's, but it's yours, your own psyche. Each of our psyches is unique. The makeup of our subconscious belief system is unique to us. No one else sees the world the way you do. No one ever has, and no one ever will. So there might be a reason for that. Maybe the spirit, in wanting to experience itself at the level of humanity, just is doing it through all of humanity. You might say, well, why not just me? Aren't I special? Yeah, you're special, just like everybody else. Let me ask you a question. What's your relationship to a single cell in your liver? Let's say the cell's name is Bob. And Bob's been in your liver its whole life, part of your liver. It's all it knows. Okay, it's one of about 1 billion liver cells that you have. Do you know Bob personally? No, probably not. You couldn't see Bob if Bob was laying in front of you all by himself because he's so small. Right? But yet you love Bob, don't you? You want Bob to have good welfare and have a good life and take care of all the stuff you put in your liver, right? Well, what if that's the relationship of spirit is more to the totality than to the individual? And each individual has within it all the creative intelligence it needs to express itself fully. There's nothing to be given, everything has already been given. And our job is to actualize, just like Bob needs to actualize the highest level of liver celldom that it can to maximize its experience. And you need to do that on the human level, which is like one cell in all of humanity. Now, if Bob loses his reference to the whole, he becomes a problem. You know what cancer is? Cancer is a cell that loses its reference to the whole. If cancer is successful, it kills its host and itself. So when a cell loses its reference to the whole, it becomes destructive. Human beings that lose their reference to the whole become destructive. Every time when you turn on the news, which is God's prayer list, what you see is the result of people that feel separated and that have claimed themselves unworthy. And out of that pain and wounding, some of them strike out. Every time, no exceptions. And we've all done it, maybe not well enough to get on the news, thank God. But we've all done. Haven't you struck out at someone and lashed out in some way, verbally or emotionally or maybe physically, because you felt separate, hurt, and wounded? There's no other reason to do it. You don't do it when you feel powerful. When you feel powerful, all you want to do is hug. So your definition is yours alone, and yet we can... Does your definition work for you? This is a question no one ever asked me when I was in my previous religion, because they didn't care. It wasn't on the agenda. It is what it is, deal with it. Right? We say spirit is within me. God isn't up there in the sky. God is within me as me. I am an actualization of creative intelligence. So if I have a good definition of spirit, a good working definition, my life works. If I don't, I suffer. And the suffering is a gift because it lets me know I'm out of alignment. You know, your car has a check engine light on it. Some of you, it's lit right now. Right? You can put a piece of black tape over it. If it gets too annoying, and it'll kind of blend into the dashboard, your check engine light is there not to drive you crazy. It's there to let you know that something's out of whack. Something needs to be balanced. There's an imbalance in that system. And it might be as simple as your gas cap's loose, or it might be something that's more immediate. Well, as your humans, how could we invent a check engine light if we didn't have one of our own? Humans can't invent anything that's not part of us, that doesn't reflect an aspect of what we are. Your check engine light is, how's your life going? How you feeling physically, emotionally, mentally? You know? And when you get up in the morning, you know, you do that, you look in the mirror and you go, oh, God. Because you got a lot of work to do to leave the house. But that's okay, you do it and you go, right? Some people aren't here today because they looked at the mirror and said, not today. I think God has a sense of humor. You know, I mean, is this the work of a serious artist? Your definition of God should be a working definition that changes as you change. Your realization of the divine will deepen and expand as you do your spiritual work, and the definition should continue to grow and expand. So when I do that, the first step of treatment, the first step of prayer treatment is the nature of spirit as I understand it. And if it's not accurate, if it's limited, then the whole rest of the treatment begins on a limited idea. If I start out, maybe I start out when I first learned spiritual mind treatment, my God's an Old Testament version of God. It's Yahweh. And I'm saying, God is good. God is all there is. And I'm hoping he's not got his finger working toward the smite button as I'm saying it. And then I'm going to build a consciousness of receptivity to my good? I don't think so. I've got to align myself with truth. The truth is that God is all the potential that ever existed and ever will exist. That anything, it's all God. Your worst day and your best day is all God expressing as you. But you get to choose which aspect of God you're expressing by designing your mental patterns and your spiritual practice to get you into the pathway of good, however you define that. That's up to us. Let's try another slide. Let's go again. So the questions that are part of this: what is my definition of God? It's a good thing to sit down and think about, because you have one now, you may not be aware. Mine was all unconscious for most of my life until I started thinking about it, because I wasn't supposed to think about it before. If I raise a question, well, what about the nature of God? Hey, this is the nature of God, shut up and obey. So what we have is a lot of people that have left that tradition because it doesn't work, but they haven't found anything like this because they say, oh, it looks like a church. It must be doing the same stuff that, you know. And some of you, think of the first day you came in here. You probably like kind of stuck your toe in a little and, you know, is this a sex cult? I know some of you still wish it was, but. Can't have everything. Next slide. Does my idea of God have form? See, the basic idea we talk about as spirit is it's beyond form. It's everything. It includes form, but it's beyond form. Its defining characteristics is its infinite nature. Infinite nature, really, really, really important. The biggest idea we have to accept is that God is infinite, and the problem is a human mind cannot conceive of an infinite. But we can kind of get the idea. An infinite is infinite infinitely. What does that mean? It means you can't have an infinite and something. If there's an infinite, there can only be one, and it has to include everything. If one little tiny liver cell gets outside of the infinite is no longer infinite. Okay? Now, most theologies teach that God is infinite, but they don't act like it. So if God is infinite, guess what? You're part of it. Sorry. A lot of you know have been working against that idea for some time. God, why are you doing this to me today? No, it's God, why am I doing this as me today? Big difference. If God is infinite, I'm part of God. So are you. So here's how I define myself. I am that part of God who is perfectly designed to live the life of the person called Jim Lockard to perfection. And I already have everything I need to do it. Nothing needs to be added, except maybe awareness of that truth. Now that's frustrating because, you know, it's really fun to blame other people for your problems. God, that feels good, doesn't it? Blame the government. Blame your ex-wife, ex-husband, your parents, your sisters, your kids, the neighbor's kids, your cat. It's not my fault, it's this damn cat. My life would be so much better without that cat. You know? Well, get rid of the cat. Oh, I love the cat. That's me being a really diminished version of God is me. All right? Next. What image have I given God? You know, the human mind wants to do this. It wants to give things an image. So pick something that's kind of big, like the universe or something like that. Something transcendent. When I do my first step of treatment, I want to feel that I'm in a transcendent realm of unconditional love. And start my prayer from there. That's pretty good, right? Might take me a year to get there, really, in terms of working with it. But that's what you do. Every time you do a treatment, you do each step and you visualize and you feel deeper and broader into the reality. Next. How is this definition working for or against me in my life? That's something you need to look at. And if it isn't working for you, it's because it's too limited. It needs to expand. Next. So we begin with the idea that God is all there is. We said that already. Infinite nature of spirit. There's no spot where God is not. God is in the worst moment of your life. I once saw a CD cover back a few years ago. I was out with my daughter. She was looking at the hip hop section. And it said, the title of the CD was, if there's a devil, the devil is in God. I went, yeah, buy that. Then I saw the parental advisory label, and I said, well, maybe don't buy that. But that's the truth. If there is a devil, the devil's in God. If God's infinite, so all your problems are within that infinite. You know, in the Bible, Lucifer sat at the right hand of God, was one of the angels who fell. The idea of a demon, daemon, D-A-E-M-O-N, means a negative thought. Your demons are your negative thoughts, your stories that you've bought into that aren't true, that haunt you. If we get a new story, the old story goes away. Next. God's infinite, we said that. God is access within, not without. That's a new idea. Not for you, but for many people. Matter of fact, when I tell some of my very religious friends we access God within, they go, oh, you're a blasphemer. You're going to go to hell. I say, well, that's where all the interesting people are going to be anyway. I'm willing to go there. Next. God is love and law. Dr. Holmes says very early in the textbook, God is love, not necessarily the syrupy, emotional kind of love we think about as romantic love. Love being the empowering energy of possibility. The potential within you that desires to express at your highest level is love. All human behavior is the expression of love. Some of it skillful, some of it unskillful. It's only a matter of skill. And God is law. Law is the impersonal aspect that works the same for everybody. If I walked around the room today and took a hammer and you stuck your hand out and I smacked all of you with the hammer, it would hurt pretty equally for everybody. The hammer doesn't care. Spirit doesn't play favorites. It's the same for everyone. It's cause and effect. I create the consciousness, the universe rushes in to fill it and says yes. The universe is an affirmative place. It always says yes to whatever ridiculous idea I come up with and accept. If I accept that there's something wrong with me, that I'm a victim, all the victimizers come out of the woodwork. They're attracted to me like flies to honey. And if I decide to be a victimizer, all the victims show up because that's what they're looking for. Subconsciously, of course. Next. The law is impersonal. Just said that. The love is unconditional. What does that mean? You know, unconditional love, it means it's there impersonally. It's available for everyone. If you pick it up, you pick it up. If you don't, you don't. God isn't micromanaging your life. When I was a little kid, I was taught to pray to God to do something different than He had done yesterday. You didn't get your bicycle? You want a bicycle? Pray to God to give you a bicycle tomorrow because he didn't give you one today. That didn't work very well. You know, crying to my dad, that worked. He finally gave in. He would change and be different, but the universe can't. The universal mind is already given. The question is, can I accept? That's the only question. What am I receptive to? That's what I get. And next. I recommend you create a Defining God worksheet. Very quickly, it's just a piece of paper with a line across the middle. It's very technical. On the top or on the bottom, you can do this in any order. On the top or the bottom, you make a list of all the qualities of spirit that you're aware of or would like to be aware of, and that'll continue to grow and change. And on the bottom or the top, whichever, again, your preference is, make a picture of what the divine is to you. And every now and then, pull it out and look at it and alter it to show your own growth. There's a chapter in my book about how to do that. Oh, there's the book. And I think we're about done. One more. Oh, thank you. Namaste. One more. Okay. So in conclusion, I use humor, but I'm very serious about this. This is so essential. That you recognize not only do you have the authority to define God, you have to use that authority wisely, lovingly, frequently, daily, moment by moment. Because if you're not seeing the world as it is, the universe as it is, you're going to suffer. The suffering is a sign that you're not seeing things as they really are. Byron Katie says, if you have a thought that hurts, it's a false thought. Move to a true thought. How can I be more uplifting in this moment? How can I be more alive? How can I be more compassionate? That's the direction we always want to go in, even if we don't feel like it. There is nothing in the universe against you. The universe conspires on your behalf. But we have to, the only have to in our teaching is we have to develop a consciousness that says yes to our good. There's no getting around that. I can't develop a limited consciousness and live an unlimited life. I can't develop a consciousness that says I'm not responsible and expect good things to happen. Then I'd have to become dependent to match my consciousness. There isn't, one time after a talk like this, my teacher, Dr. Bill Tolliver, was out in the receiving line and talked about the impersonal nature of the law and everything, and a woman came through and took his hands and says, Dr. Bill, don't take my sweet Jesus away from me. And he looked her in the eyes, he said, sweetheart, you are sweet Jesus. Don't lose yourself. You are the son and daughter of God. Equally creative, equally divine to any being that has ever been on the planet. The only difference is a level of realization. You either get it or you don't. And the degree to which you get it and apply it, it works for you. It's an absolute guarantee. Your life experience matches the consciousness you create. Man, there's no more freedom than that. There's no Santa Claus, folks. Except you. Are you gifting yourself your greatest potential? Now, I just want you to affirm one thing with me. Just say this after me. I can't wait till tomorrow. I can't wait till tomorrow. Because I get better looking every day. And thank you and namaste.